right, so we're going to get started. My name is Kris Duggan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of BetterWorks, and we're the leader in something called continuous performance management. And what that basically means is moving companies away from the annual process of annual performance reviews, the very traditional process that we're all familiar with, to one that's ongoing, continuous, real-time, being done throughout the year. And we think that software can play a really critical role in kind of helping with that transformation. And in fact, there was 2 articles in the Wall Street Journal today that was talking about real-time feedback and how so many companies are moving to this model. And actually, half of the customers referenced in the article were BetterWorks clients. We're working with about 300 clients around the world today. And many of these are doing global deployments. I would say that we started off, we're based in Silicon Valley. We started off doing the kind of the movers and the shakers, tech kind of clients. But what we're seeing now is that even large enterprises are thinking about these challenges and trying to figure out how to kind of facilitate this shift. We work with 2 of the Fortune 10 as an example, and energy companies, manufacturing organizations. So it's not just a kind of a high-tech phenomenon anymore. And the company is backed by, I would say, some of the best and the brightest. Thank you. We have another group of people joining us, so it's exciting to see us filling this entire area for the video. So come, if you can squeeze in. I know it's only a standing room only, but we're doing this for the video, and it's really important that everybody that wants to have a seat has a chance to do that. And so in terms of the funding and kind of the thought leadership that has gone into the company, we're very proud to have John Doerr on our board of directors from Kleiner Perkins. We have folks from Deloitte and Google that are involved in this movement. And it's really, I think there's a lot of energy and interest in this, and it's a hard problem to solve. So we're very proud to have some of the best and brightest on board. And so what's our vision? It's to help people reach their full potential at work. And what are the challenges that get in the way of that? The first is, do people know what to focus on? What are their priorities? What are their expectations? When business is moving so quickly, right? The dynamic nature of business, the competitive nature of business, just the need to just be super agile and adaptable, that focus can be a major challenge. The second is, do people get enough feedback? And are we creating a culture where it's about continuous improvement and reaching your full potential? Or are we surprising them at the end of the year with a bunch of feedback that maybe is actually the only recent feedback that we can remember, and then that's kind of the way that they are trying to learn and grow from that? And then the third challenge, I would say, is actually if you have a larger organization, if you have 5,000 or 50,000 people in your company, how do you solve these problems at scale is actually a really difficult problem. The facilitation of this becomes an issue. And, and those have real issues and consequences. Some of the issues that we see with the traditional approach is that managers are spending 200 hours at the end of the year doing administrative work on performance reviews. In fact, I just spoke with Donna Morris, the CHRO at Adobe. She said that she validated that and said it was 17 hours per manager per employee is the time that was spent. And to put that in perspective, you could actually fly around the world. It takes about 40 hours to fly around the Earth. You could fly around the Earth 5 times in the time that people are actually writing paperwork at the end of the year. Obviously, a huge waste of time. And then the other piece of this is, okay, so you put that effort in, and do people think it's worthwhile? And the vast majority of people say it's a total waste of time. It did not create value relative to the effort put in. And imagine if 94% of people said they didn't like the lunch that we serve in the cafeteria. Would we continue serving the same lunch? Obviously not, and yet we do that at work when it comes to our most precious resources. Clearly something has to change here. There's a ton of data on, if you're on an annual goal cycle, people are not updating their goals throughout the year. There's also some really interesting data out of Burson on this that says the average shelf life for a goal is about 40 days. So if you're doing annual goals and you're in a competitive market that's fast-moving and dynamic, then it's almost like you're not doing goals at all. Right? That administrative work of just putting them into your HRIS is actually not doing anything in terms of business results. There's also data that shows that companies that go from annual goal setting to quarterly goal setting are 3.5 times more likely to be high performers in their industry. And so, I mean, it's clear because they can move quickly and they can adjust and they can kind of mobilize their workforce to kind of attack opportunity. And so there's a lot of data that supports why that has to change. And then there's a ton of data on kind of millennials and their expectations in the workforce, and just kind of what people are asking for in today's kind of workplace. And that is that everybody wants more feedback. And you might remember at school, this is my son Aiden. He's now 12. I think he's 8 or 9 here. He was recognized at school. They've institutionalized the process of feedback and recognition, and it's something that they invest in. And yet at work, we kind of let managers kind of figure it out. And and clearly, just with the pace of change and how people are expecting to be invested in and to grow and to have development opportunities, the need for feedback is going to be it's at an all-time high, and companies have to do something about it. So I think McKinsey kind of summarizes it best by saying, the process is time-consuming, it's excessively subjective, it's demotivating, and it's ultimately unhelpful. So what are we going to do about it? That's really kind of the next question. And so, welcome to the continuous performance management movement. I do think it's a movement. A ton of companies are rethinking performance right now, and just like they're thinking kind of how they're going to take their learning and development opportunities to the next level. Performance is the other side of that coin, and it's really something that's absolutely critical to the business. And so you've probably already read in the press or seen or maybe even experienced firsthand how companies are moving to this. The data shows that about 1 in 3 companies right now is moving away from the annual cadence of how they operationalize their business. And that number is only going to increase as more and more companies get on board with this. And when they go through this process of moving to a more ongoing, real-time, continuous model, the data is actually really compelling. 96% say the process was simpler. 100% say they increased the quality of conversations. Like, if you care about coaching and if you care about manager growth and manager kind of authenticity with employees, then clearly having more frequent checkpoints on this stuff is going to drive value. The data is really clear that 91% said the data for employee evaluation increased. And so if you, and in terms of quality, if you care about reducing biases in the workplace, if you care about eliminating subjectivity, then if you care about increasing diversity, then this is an area that I think is going to be really important for you to consider as you think about moving to an ongoing model of performance management. And then 90% say they increased engagement just by having more frequent touch points throughout the year, getting more aligned on goals, having a clarity of purpose, making sure that work connects to the big picture, and then checking in frequently has a net impact of people actually feeling more motivated and engaged. And so, okay, so now let's define what is continuous performance management. Make sure we have a kind of a clear summary and understanding of that. So I would say it's 3 things. It's what are we doing for goals? It's what are we doing for feedback? And then it's how do we facilitate this at scale? How do we actually drive this across a large company? In a small company, 500 people, you might be able to just have some resources in there to kind of support it. But as you get bigger and bigger, clearly the need for technology to kind of enable this becomes really important. All right, so let's take a look at the next slide here. That's not advancing. We're pausing for some technical difficulties. Thank you all for joining us today. I realize that there's a Betsy Davos session happening as well, and so the fact that all of you chose to spend your time here is very, very meaningful. All right, so we're going to skip ahead. Thank you. And there we go. All right, so let's go through the first section. So goals. And we've talked a little bit about it, but this is about frequent goal setting. What are you working on? These are just your expectations, your priorities. It's nothing any more special than that, other than do we have a clear agreement on what those things are and how you're going to create value in your role at the company. There are some really interesting things you can do with technology now to connect systems that you use on a daily basis with your goals. So at BetterWorks, we actually enable some of that capability. So if you have Salesforce and you want to kind of capture progress that you have in the sales organization against your sales goals, we automate that for you. So it actually makes it easy. You don't have to have humans keying in things. If you have your leads in the marketing team in Salesforce or your Marketo system, you can capture that data. If you have engineering data in Jira or Asana, then you can capture that data. But the point here is that people are setting goals on a frequent basis and checking in and updating those. And one of the innovations that we're actually seeing when it comes to how the workplace has changed is the need for connecting goals cross-functionally in a way that these traditional HRIS systems simply do not facilitate. And so today, in today's day and age, marketing has to work with sales, product has to work with engineering, and they have common goals. They ship the product or go to market. And yet you go into your Workday or you go into your, some of these traditional systems, and they're very top-down, they're very hierarchical. And so not only does actually investing in the cadence of goal setting make sense, but also thinking about how you're facilitating the kind of goal setting that you want as a company, I think is part of this overall concept of continuous performance management. So the second area is what we call feedback. And, and that's really, and you can define kind of what that means to you. And I think there's lots of flavors. The main thing here is, are you checking in with people frequently? And you decide what frequently means in terms of the right cadence. And I think there's some cultural questions to answer around, what is the right cadence for our business? And then how do we want to facilitate these check-ins? The companies that we work with tell us that they want authentic dialogue on an ongoing basis between managers and employees and peers. And so you might have things like a quarterly check-in between a manager and employee on expectations. And then the next quarter you might have a check-in on career opportunities and growth. But the point is that if you do these throughout the year, you're going to kind of get everybody aligned and kind of going in the right direction, much more so than if you wait till December. Peer feedback, we think there's some really interesting innovations that are happening here, and I'll talk about that in a few slides. Machine learning and some really interesting things that actually can facilitate when do you prompt for feedback, when do you capture feedback, and how do you make feedback actually easy and lightweight to kind of do. If you can do that, then the quality of these signals can really drive performance in the right way. And then if you are doing reviews, a lot of the customers that we work with actually are eliminating performance reviews altogether. Some want to use BetterWorks throughout the year for their continuous performance process and then feed their end-of-year formal process in their Workdays or their SAPs or their Oracles and do the formal review there. And then others, just if they say, hey, it's already being done in BetterWorks, let's even do a lightweight kind of a format of a review at the end of the year. Maybe we're not ready to get rid of ratings. Maybe we believe that we want to get rid of ratings, but we're not ready to do that. And so how do we make the technology meet us where we are? And then the last piece of this is, how do you make this manageable? How do you do this at scale? How do you automate it? And how do you drive company-wide participation? That's a really critical element here is, are people actually using it? Are they participating? One of the most important statistics for us and stats that we look at is how often are people touching the app weekly and how often are they touching it monthly? And what we've been able to show is that if a company is using a traditional HRIS system like your Workday, SAP, Oracle, we can deliver a 10x behavior change in the kind of level of engagement with those users just by switching to a platform like this. All right. And so, how do we do it? We've already talked a bit about these concepts. I'll focus on, I think, just a couple. One is lightweight. So it has to be super lightweight. It has to be embedded in the things that you're doing in your Outlook, in your Gmail, in your calendaring, integrated with your systems like Salesforce and Jira. It needs to be configurable. So if you want to run this part of the operation and organization on this kind of cadence and another part on this cadence, and this part really is about, really disciplined about goal setting, and this part's really about feedback, how you do that at scale, needs to be very respectful of kind of where your culture is and their readiness to support this. And we think we've kind of solved that from an enterprise configurability standpoint in a way that we think is very unique. All right. And part of that, I've talked about the integrations. We think that's really exciting to kind of capture progress that's happening in different systems, but then also play nice with your HRIS investments. So if you have a standard for kind of the back office HR, we need to pull data from there. We need to push data back to it, and it needs to kind of be a very complementary kind of experience for not only for administratively, but also for your managers and your end users. All right, so I talked about some of the innovations. I would say that integrations is an innovation that we've introduced into the marketplace. The second innovation that we're really excited about is something that we call the work graph. And the work graph basically is this. Once you start to have data, and by the way, the HRIS systems don't have this data, but data around who's setting goals, how are you connecting goals cross-functionally, who's checking in on goals, operational data like progress and who's actually making progress on things. Once you start to have things like which managers are checking in with their employees, and you can even start to do sentiment analysis on that kind of data, you basically have a very rich kind of asset that you can start to basically make inferences from and make connections and suggestions and recommendations. We call that our work graph. And I'll show you in a couple of slides here how we're actually using that to make really interesting and amazing recommendations on who to even poll for feedback and when to do that. All right, so how can you implement a continuous performance management process? And so I'll walk through just a few screenshots here just to kind of give you a sense for the product, but also try to speak to some different flavors around how you might want to think about this stuff. So one of the things that we're seeing is as we move to larger and larger deployments, in the tens of thousands or potentially hundreds of thousands of seats within an organization, it really does need to be respectful in a way where we've identified actually two personas. The first persona is we realize that we want to have living, breathing goals, but we just want to get in and out. It has to be like a really quick process, and it has to be like it has to be the most lightweight experience you could imagine, otherwise, or it's just too much. And that could be for maybe some of the routine work kind of departments that you might have, customer support, something like that. The other persona is the group that's actually so operationally disciplined and rigorous that what they're actually replacing is not the goals that are in Workday, but they're replacing spreadsheets, they're replacing PowerPoint, they're replacing Google Docs. And so the system actually has to be quite rich. And if you don't give them those capabilities to align goals, cascade goals, make them very measurement-oriented, integrated, real-time, et cetera, then you're not going to meet their needs. And so we've actually solved that by creating a product that allows you to choose what kind of goal discipline are you ready to support. Do you just want to import goals straight out of Workday and then actually focus on feedback and some of this other stuff, or does it really need to be an operational system? And we find that to be quite effective. Once you have goals into the system, it's about checking in on them on an ongoing basis and having these kind of manager-employee conversations. We do think that having that goal data right next to that conversation around expectations or priorities is absolutely critical, and that seamlessness is really an important part of this. And we think that we do that in a very unique way. And so you can see an example here where you have the data right there. You don't have to go looking through emails. You don't have to kind of go researching things. You don't have to go through multiple systems. It's right there, which makes that quite effective. And then similarly, you don't want to have to kind of go looking for feedback, collecting feedback, sending emails for feedback, going to a different system for that. It's also right there where the conversation is. So the conversation is actually the central experience to this, and goals, inputs, feedback, and peer inputs, all of that help create a higher quality conversation. I talked about using machine learning and the work graph to drive peer feedback. We actually are using that right now to actually suggest who you should poll for feedback. And you've probably experienced, if you've gone through 360 on an annual basis, there's some gaming that goes on. Who am I going to ask? Scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. And then you send the emails, you collect the emails, and the manager kind of does the roll-up. So why not just eliminate all of that, make it much more ongoing as you're actually doing work, maybe working on goals, initiatives, priorities, and then basically have the system prompt who it knows you should probably ask for feedback because they're the people that you're working with, right? So obviously that can be made a lot more smart and intelligent. All right, and then the summary of all of that is that there's a lot of ways to do this, and you have to find the right way for your company. So you might want to say, hey, we're ready to do scheduled peer feedback, maybe quarterly. One quarter we'll ask for values. The next quarter we'll talk about how cross-functional people are. The next quarter we'll say how transparent and how well of a job does the manager do cascading information. But you can orient that within the organization. Or you might want to say, hey, we actually want to move to a model where anybody can give feedback anytime. Or maybe they can request feedback anytime. And how do you do you want the feedback to be visible only to the employee and the manager? There's lots of ways that you can orient this to kind of work with your culture. And similarly, once you have a culture of feedback, you want to have these conversations, and you can have those either scheduled or ad hoc initiated. And in fact, we're seeing in some organizations where the HR organization is saying, we really want to have the employee be empowered to initiate these check-ins with their manager at any time, and it's this technique that allows them to kind of take control of their own destiny. And we talked about the kind of the autopilot and the facilitation, but here you can see an example of, basically imagine if you had to run a program like this, and you have 50,000 people that you need to kind of mobilize. It's hard enough to kind of agree on what are we going to eat for lunch, let alone how we're going to run our, the performance system. And so we have some really great technology that, when you think about a delightful modern experience is going to have reminders, alerts, push things to your phone, push things to your calendar, and basically kind of, keep your program on rails. And we have some really great technology that does that for you. And here you can see an example of a smart contextual reminder that's even kind of driving that out to the end user. And we know what you've done, we know what you haven't done, we can even guide your experience on a per user personalized basis. And does it work? So we do power the performance process for companies like Walmart. And you can see here they said annual goals were becoming outdated. Managers weren't having regular conversations with their employees. Surprise, surprise. We've just talked about that. And they also found that after implementing BetterWorks, they see that their associates now are having they're clear on priorities. They have consistent conversations. They're getting regular feedback. And the process is much more easy and effective. And as an example, Workday or Walmart, if you know, in the press has been using SuccessFactors for their HRIS. They're actually switching to Workday. There's been a lot of press about that. They were using SuccessFactors for their performance process. Prior to last year, they saw about a 38% adherence rate to their program with SAP. With BetterWorks, we were able to drive their program compliance to 98%. So just making it easy, lightweight, and kind of integrated into the experience allowed us to deliver a successful experience for their company. And we can see here that it's not just for companies like Walmart, but even small and mid-sized companies. And each of these is kind of tuning their program to meet their own needs. So you can kind of tailor this in the way that's going to work for you. And kind of pick and choose even the elements that you want to prioritize. If you're looking at using this today, I would say, start with a mid-year check-in. That's probably a great way to actually get going with the technology. And the last thing I'll share as we kind of wrap up is I'm excited to announce that I do have a book coming out. It's co-authored with John Doerr, and it's titled Measure What Matters. It's available for pre-order for all of your teams, not just yourself, but your entire organization. And the website for that is www.measurewhatmattersbook.com. And you can pre-order the book for your entire department. But what they're going to learn in the book is basically how world-class organizations are thinking about goals, how they're thinking about performance, how they're innovating in these areas. And we have really amazing stories. We have the Gates Foundation talking about how they use these concepts to cure malaria on a global scale. We have examples of Google. Larry Page actually wrote the foreword for the book. But we also have some fun stories from personalities like Bono, who uses these techniques in his One Foundation organization. So it's not just for commercial entities, it's nonprofits. Anybody that needs to mobilize a group of people to a common aspirational goal. And so with that, I'll thank you for your time. And now we can applaud. Yes?
When you're giving feedback, do you help people understand the importance of feedback and how to give it constructively? Or is it just much more to give feedback?
Yeah, so I would say depending on the feedback culture that you have, if you already have a strong sense of that or if it's something that's new, I think a lot of it is the guiding questions that HR can kind of predefine that will kind of get people comfortable with it. I would actually, what I'm seeing is that moving to an ad hoc model just straight out of the gate when there's no capacity for feedback is probably a little bit dangerous. And maybe a nice starting point is, let's do a scheduled feedback this quarter on values and behaviors, what's working well, what's one thing that we could improve, and kind of like use like a crawl, walk, run kind of approach to it. Did that answer your question?
No.
Okay.
And then when you say about configuration, is it like one organization
within the organization, you could also have different cadences and different rules around how you want to run that. So one division could run it quarterly, the engineering team could run it every 6 weeks, the sales department only wants to do 6-month check-ins, this group wants ad hoc feedback, this group actually wants scheduled feedback. All of that's entirely configurable. All right, thank you.